Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation with over 230 million people, is once again at the center of international attention after US President Donald Trump ordered the American military to prepare for possible action against Islamist militants in the country. The directive came with Trump accusing the Nigerian government of failing to protect Christians, warning that unless it intervened, the United States might act guns blazing. The move shocked many observers, raising concerns about the potential for a new US military intervention in Africa and the geopolitical consequences it could carry. Trump's announcement followed weeks of claims circulating in certain American media circles, alleging that Christians in Nigeria were being systematically targeted in what some described as a religious genocide. These claims, while powerful, are not supported by independent data. Organizations such as the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project have recorded over 63,000 deaths linked to insurgency-related violence in Nigeria since 2009, most of which involved Muslim victims. Both Boko Haram and its splinter faction, the Islamic State West Africa Province, have attacked civilians, soldiers, and religious communities without discrimination. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have consistently stated that the violence is not religion-specific, but rather the result of complex political, economic, and social factors. Nigeria's government reacted cautiously to Trump's threat. Daniel Bwala, a senior advisor to President Bola Tinubu, said that while Nigeria welcomed international cooperation against jihadist groups, the country remained sovereign and would expect any assistance to come through coordination, not unilateral action. He explained that Islamist insurgents have killed people of all faiths and backgrounds, and the government's fight against them is not a matter of religion, but national security. President Tinubu also reiterated Nigeria's commitment to religious tolerance, emphasizing that insecurity in the country affects both Christians and Muslims across all regions and ethnic lines. The US currently provides Nigeria with around $700 million in annual aid, a portion of which goes toward counterterrorism efforts. Trump's threat to cut off that support adds further pressure to a relationship already strained by trade disputes and differing foreign policy priorities. His comments were followed by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth confirming that the Department of War had begun preliminary planning for potential military operations in Nigeria. If such an operation were ever carried out, it would mark the first direct US strike inside Nigerian territory. Analysts note that the United States maintains roughly 7,000 troops across Africa through the US Africa Command, but Nigeria does not host a permanent American base. Most US activity in West Africa currently operates from neighboring Niger, where American drones conduct surveillance and intelligence missions. The president's announcement also coincided with his decision to designate Nigeria as a country of particular concern, a classification used by the US State Department for nations accused of violating religious freedom. The designation, which allows for sanctions and aid restrictions, had been lifted several years earlier after Nigeria made progress in fostering interfaith dialogue. Restoring the status reignited fears among Nigerian officials that diplomatic and economic relations could suffer, especially as bilateral trade between the two countries exceeds $10 billion annually. Analysts argue that the move serves a dual purpose, signaling a hardline foreign policy stance, while appealing to Trump's evangelical support base, which views defending global Christianity as a moral imperative. To understand the roots of the crisis, it's essential to examine the security situation inside Nigeria. The Islamist insurgency began in 2009 when Boko Haram launched an armed rebellion in Borno State, opposing what it called the corruption of Western education. Over time, the group evolved into one of the deadliest terrorist movements in the world, responsible for bombings, kidnappings, and mass killings. By 2015, An internal rift had produced ISWAP, which pledged allegiance to the Islamic State and currently operates around Lake Chad. Combined, these groups have displaced more than 2.5 million Nigerians and forced another 300,000 to flee into neighboring countries such as Chad, Niger, and Cameroon. Beyond the insurgency, Nigeria also faces long-running communal conflicts in its central regions. There, mostly Muslim Fulani herders and predominantly Christian farming communities frequently clash over access to land and water, resources made increasingly scarce by desertification and climate change. These disputes have killed more than 15,000 people in the past decade. Although religion is often used to frame these clashes, experts stress that they are primarily driven by environmental pressures and economic inequality, not faith-based hatred. Trump's sudden intervention has therefore created confusion and concern among diplomats and policymakers. Internationally, reactions have been mixed. The African Union, the European Union, and the United Nations have all urged restraint, calling for dialogue rather than unilateral military action. In Washington, members of Congress from both parties have questioned whether the president has the legal authority to initiate military strikes without congressional approval. The debate mirrors earlier controversies during Trump's presidency, such as his threats to strike Iran in 2019 and Venezuela in 2020, both of which were ultimately not carried out. Foreign policy experts suggest that this latest threat may be part of a broader pattern, using bold, high-impact rhetoric to signal toughness while avoiding prolonged military entanglement. For Nigeria, however, the political and social impact of Trump's words is already being felt. On social media, nationalist voices are calling for greater self-reliance in defense matters, while others fear that foreign interference could destabilize an already fragile situation. Religious leaders have warned that framing Nigeria's complex security crisis as a war on Christianity risks inflaming divisions and giving extremist groups new propaganda tools. Jihadist factions such as Boko Haram have historically exploited anti-Western sentiment to recruit followers, and renewed U.S. involvement could feed that narrative. At the same time, misinformation continues to spread online, often in the form of misattributed videos or inflated statistics portraying Nigeria as a country descending into religious war. Analysts caution that such narratives, especially when amplified by political figures, can distort reality and hinder efforts to achieve peace. In truth, Nigeria's conflicts stem from a mix of poverty, corruption, regional inequality, and weak governance, rather than a simple clash of faiths. The Nigerian government has since called for calm and suggested that a diplomatic meeting between Trump and President Tinubu could help diffuse tensions. Officials have expressed openness to greater counterterrorism cooperation, provided it is conducted through legal and collaborative frameworks. As of now, there are no confirmed plans for U.S. troop deployment or military strikes, and the situation remains largely rhetorical. Yet the mere possibility of intervention has already reshaped international perceptions and reminded both nations of the delicate balance between sovereignty and global security interests. Ultimately, this episode highlights how narratives can influence foreign policy and public perception. Nigeria's ongoing fight against insurgency, climate-driven conflict, and economic instability is real and urgent. But describing it as a religious war risks deepening divisions rather than solving them. Beneath the headlines and fiery rhetoric are millions of ordinary Nigerians, farmers, traders, students, and families who simply want stability and peace. Whether Trump's latest threat turns out to be mere political theater or a prelude to greater involvement, one thing is clear: the world is watching closely, and Nigeria's fragile peace may once again hang in the balance.